Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Today, GGG Games announced their plans for patch 0.2.1. This is scheduled to come out at the end of next week, and we'll see over the next little while whether they adhere to that timeline or whether there's any sort of slippage on it. The reason I'm making a video on it today though, is that GGG Games have done a substantial write-up on what they're planning to include in the patch. This is going to be a continuation on the work that they've been doing in order to make loot systems feel more rewarding throughout Path of Exile 2. 0.2.0G in particular, but also 0.2.0H, have had a fair amount of changes to the loot systems, and I would say that they are the biggest patches that have taken place so far since Dawn of the Hunt came out. 0.2.1 is going to continue down that line. I do want to start though with an aside that's going to become important later, and that is to ask the question, is it better for players when unique items are really common or when they're really rare? I don't think players will agree on this. I think a lot of people are going to say to themselves initially, yeah, I'd rather have items be really common because then I can loot my own items. But then what tends to happen is you get a situation like Path of Exile 1's item Kitava's Thirst. Here is the price history of Kitava's Thirst over the Settlers League. This is an item that is the most equipped unique helmet on optimized characters in Path of Exile 1 at the moment. And you can see that it's pretty cheap. In fact, the price of this item is pretty much set by the friction involved in picking it up and someone porting out of a map to trade it. Because in Path of Exile 1, a price tag of 5 to 10 Chaos Orbs, it's even less than it would be in Path of Exile 2. The reason Kitava's Thirst is so cheap is not because of its power level, it's because it is so incredibly common in that game. This item is something that a middling optimized endgame player in Path of Exile 1 might end up looting 3 of in a 3-hour play session. They probably won't actually pick them up, because it's likely not even on their loot filter. That is what happens when an item is really common. However, items can definitely also be too rare as well. And what is too rare, what is too common, is going to be something that players will disagree on. What GGG Games have decided to do with 0.2.1 is take all of the chase items, the Astramentises, the Dream Fragments, and also some of the items that I think they intended to be chase items, but that just haven't made it, like Erisvane's Wings, and they're going to make them substantially more common than they were in 0.2.0. If they get this right, then it's going to mean that that adrenaline rush of getting an exhilarating drop is going to happen more often for more players. If they get this wrong, then a number of the items that are currently exhilarating to loot are going to end up being quite mundane to loot. And ultimately, we're not going to know until several weeks after this patch has landed, once people have been able to play with it for a while, whether they hit the nail on the head or whether they ended up getting it wrong. Anyways, let's go through all of the changes they're making in 0.2.1. Firstly, there is this section called Endgame Rewards. This doesn't contain that much in the way of details, but it is worth quickly unpacking. So when setting up the frequency of encounters and rewards for Path of Exile 2, we had to decide how many maps players will have to do in order to get them. After extensive playtesting, we now believe that we overshot this number pretty substantially. I think one of the key reasons that they've made this mistake is they've looked at Path of Exile 1 where you can complete a map on a fairly optimized character in 70 seconds, 90 seconds, that sort of time frame. And then they've gone and thought, okay, we want this item to show up once every 20 hours that people play. Well, the best way to do that is to set it to be once per 800 maps. And if you set it once per 800 maps, well, that's going to be 20 hours of play, isn't it? But in Path of Exile 2, doing maps does not take 75 to 90 seconds, it takes substantially longer. And that means that you've ended up not going once every 20 hours, but perhaps you've gone for more like once every 100 hours instead. So in 0.2.0G, they improved the baseline experience of getting rewards from monsters and chests, but we still feel you don't get enough of those exhilarating moments when something very powerful or very valuable drops. There are some cool items to find, but you won't ever find them because they are incredibly rare. One of the major focuses of 0.2.1 is making chase items more common, but also adding more chase items to find. So unique items. Firstly, they're talking about those chase items that are in the Astramentis tier. In 0.2.1, we're going to be significantly improving the drop rates of the incredibly rare unique items we already have, as well as adding a number of new, exciting and chase uniques that will take your builds to new heights. We're also buffing some of the rarer uniques, and I think this is the Erisvane's Wings tiers here, that were intended to be chase, but that didn't live up to that standard. You should see significantly more chase uniques than before, and we'll be doing a post showcasing some of these new uniques next week. Now, this is going to be something that will be really good for the feeling of the first couple of days. No matter where they pitch this, it's going to feel fantastic. The first couple of days you log on and you have an Astramentis drop. Even if it turns out that they've made Astramentis way more common, and so it ceases to be a super chase item in the future, we don't know whether it's going to be a little bit more common or a lot more common. Early on, it's going to feel absolutely fantastic. The real question is whether they get this right in the long term. My preference here is that if they think it's best for the game that Astramentis is 12 times as common as it is in 020, then what I hope they do is that they just triple it the first time, then they double it, then they double it again. And each time they're able to test it and see whether they've got it right or not, or whether it needs to be adjusted further. Because I don't think we want a situation where they overshoot it and then they need to pull it back later. This is one of those things that's best to go softly on, at least in my opinion. Other than that though, the idea of new unique items can definitely be exciting, as well as buffs to existing already rare unique items. The other big question that comes up is, will there still be a space for rare items? And there's a little bit more on rare items later when we get to the ritual section and we start talking about some of the chase omens. The next section they discuss is crafting Socketables. Now, I really hate the way that Grotto Games have named this section. This should just be called Socketables. This is not a section where they're talking about how you can pick up a blank rune or a blank soul core and then you can slam it with an orb of alchemy and see if you end up getting something that's worth socketing into your gear. No. What this is an endgame overhaul to the existing systems of lesser, normal, and greater runes, talismans, and soul cores. There's going to be a whole bunch of new things that are being added. Grotto Games' vision here, and how accurately they managed to hit this is going to be something we'll have to see. The vision here is that early in the game, Socketables are used mostly to fix your resistances or to fix other problems you might be having with your gear, like for instance, attribute problems. That's the vision early on. Then at some point later in progression, you end up powerful enough that you no longer need your runes to be dedicated to these problems, and then at that point, you can start using something a bit more exciting. Now in 021, they're adding 22 new runes, 14 new soul cores, and 7 new talismans. These cover a full spectrum from being powerful to crazy powerful, but they're going to be rare to find. You will definitely want to use them over the normal base set of Socketables. This could be really interesting. I hope that we end up with a situation where people want different ones to each other. I don't want a situation like we had in 010, where pretty much everyone wanted to be using the same soul core, which was the increased item rarity one. The next section discusses ritual. Now, one of the things that is a recurrent theme here is they're going through all of the various mechanics that have a pinnacle boss associated with them, and they're increasing the rewards from it that don't come from the pinnacle boss. So Ritual also suffered from us pitching the chase rewards to be too rare as well. We're making the rarer omens from Ritual more common. You'll see the same number of omens, but they will have a significantly higher probability of being the rarer, more exciting ones. So a number of people have looked at these Ritual changes and their reaction has been, okay, this means that where in 020 it's 1% of the player base or less than 1% of the player base that are using these chase omens. Now, if they were to make 6 times as many of them drop, well, that means it's going to be 6% of the player base that are using them instead. I disagree. I think it will still be mostly that same 1% of the player base. The difference is that if these omens drop 6 times as often, they'll be able to throw 6 times as many of them at each craft they do. The reason I say this is that these omens don't have any diminishing returns on their functionality. In fact, they're actually better the more powerful the item already is. Contrast this to some crafting reagents. I'm particularly thinking of Path of Exile 1's Elder Slayer Exalted Orbs here. A bit of an extreme example, but you can only ever use one of those on an item under normal circumstances. So in Path of Exile 1, they end up being a really good thing that people can just use on an item with a reasonable chance of making it substantially better. It won't be guaranteed to, but there's a good chance it will, and it's something that you don't feel that you've got a huge opportunity cost because you've decided to use it on your own gear rather than selling it to someone else. Those players that can afford to throw huge amounts of crafting resources at one particular craft, they're not that interested because they already have enough of them. That's the difference, I think, between the design in Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2 on some of these high-end crafting systems. Ultimately, I don't think this ritual change is going to be as good as players think it will be, at least when it comes to crafting. That said, if you're into top-end crafting, this is going to be an absolutely massive change. I also think this is going to result in better merit tier items, and as a result, probably going to push up the value of the Mirror of Kalandra. Ritual discussion's out of the way. Corrupted essences come next. While we're at it, we'll be increasing the commonality of getting corrupted essences when using Val Orbs on monsters that are trapped in essences, and this is going to be by approximately a factor of 6. This definitely needs it. These things were incredibly rare. A factor of 6 is enormous. For those of you that play Path of Exile 1, a factor of 6 is the difference in that game between the rarity of the Divine Orb and the rarity of the Regal Orb. So you can see that is a truly massive boost in the chances of getting these things. Rogue Exiles are going to have unique items a lot more frequently than they did in the past. Now, this is going to cause Rogue Exiles to be less predictable encounters. This is going to mean that sometimes you're going to encounter a Rogue Exile that's using a unique item that just bricks its build, and sometimes you're going to encounter a Rogue Exile that is using a unique item that makes it into a truly, truly devastating threat. I do think something Grinding Your Game should probably look at is some of the worst outcomes you can get with Rogue Exiles. Like the Coming Calamity is a really good item, but probably Rogue Exiles shouldn't be allowed to get it because overruling the resistances on all nearby players and setting them to 0 is a pretty unfair effect. There's a couple other things that are really, really rippy as well, and that's something that I think should be thought about with the Rogue Exile system. It's really kind of needed it since 0.2.0, but with the increase to the number of unique items that they're going to be wearing, it's going to become more important again. Next, there's the focus on changing the loot drops that come from monsters that are found alongside Pinnacle content. So here, the Twisted Domain. The Breach Lord itself was dropping a reasonable amount of loot, but the rest of the area was pretty mundane, and this is going to be getting substantial buffs here. To start with, we have substantially increased the number of rare monsters that spawn during the domain. Previously, there could even be none of them at all, and they've changed the balance of quantity and rarity that monsters in the domain have. So this means the large drop that takes place right before you fight the boss should be way better than it's been in the past. Additionally, there will be some rare breach rings in the resulting drop, so these are guaranteed drops, so you should come away with at least some chance of getting some useful items out of there. At least that's their goal. What I think will happen is that you'll find breach rings will just end up feeling a lot less exciting when they do drop, but of course, sometimes you can be luckier. After that, there is an enormous write-up on Expedition Logbooks. Now, fundamentally, what they're doing here is they're making a couple of sweeping changes that affect all of them, and then they're giving each of the individual logbook zones its own identity. The distance between explosives and the radius of explosives are both being increased. This is going to mean that you can uncover more monsters and more rewards. On top of that, the amount of monster density that's present is going to be increased. One of the things they're talking about here is that if you're in the low level 90s, you can do an entire maximum level logbook and not even gain 1% of an XP level. And that's in the low 90s, so obviously it gets much more extreme higher up. XP in particular is going to be increasing on Expedition Logbooks as a result of this set of changes, and one of the particular zones, the Lush Isle, is going to have a major focus on increasing its XP. So if you're running a Lush Isle area, those are going to have much more XP. If you're running Frigid Bluffs, they're going to be changed, so they're no longer going to have so many corrupted items dropping in them. And the Barren Atoll is going to have substantially more gold dropping from it, and additionally, substantially more strong boxes and runes. The other thing is that a number of new features that are being added to logbooks are going to be marked on the minimap as well, so that you can see that there. After that, there's a number of Atlas changes. Particularly, Hidden Grotto was far more common than it was intended to be. It was 37.5%, 3 maps in 8 were Hidden Grotto. So Grinding Your Games have come to the conclusion that there are too many Hidden Grottos, and as a result, they're going to be nerfing the frequency of that particular map. The idea here is that there's a bit more normalization of the frequency of all the different maps that exist, and thus also all of the boss fights. The idea here is just more variety when you're at endgame. Particularly because Hidden Grotto, it's a pretty mediocre layout as well. Citadel spawning is being adjusted. There's always been an intention to have the 3 Citadels appear near each other, but they're going to be guaranteeing that a lot more. Now, it's worth noting that this is not going to apply to existing revealed areas of the Atlas. It's going to apply to new areas that are revealed after 0.2.1. But probably the single most important change that's taking place in the entire patch is the 3 things that caused 50% of player deaths at endgame are being nerfed. Nerf number 1, Ritual Encounter that causes purple chaos explosions. Nerf number 2, the other Ritual Encounter that causes chaos explosions. Nerf number 3, Volatile Plants Monster Modifier. These three things had been causing 50% of endgame player deaths between them, and they're all going to be nerfed. And on top of that, there's going to be increases to the telegraphing of volatile plants as well. So it'll be clearer that these purple balls that are coming towards you are deadly, and they won't be as ridiculously over the top as they have been before. There's also going to be a number of general endgame changes, such as nerfs to elemental penetration explicit modifiers on maps, and there's going to be more details on this coming later. So this is just them flagging that these changes are happening. Details will come in the patch notes or possibly before them. After that, there are some changes being made to the trial of the Sekhemas. These changes relate to some of the outlier boons and afflictions, particularly afflictions. The affliction that caused you to have no energy shield is being nerfed in half. It's instead going to halve your energy shield so that if you do end up getting it on a Chaos Inoculation build, you don't find yourself in a situation where you've got to try and do a no-hit run for the rest of the run. On top of this, there was a little bit of a bug in the frequency of various boons and afflictions. One affliction was 100 times as common as intended. 2 minor boons, 1 major boon, and 1 pact were each also 100 times as frequent as intended. What this tended to mean was that they would be first, and then once they'd be picked, then you'd end up getting something else. That's going to no longer be the case. These are just going to be something you'll see some of the time, rather than something you'll see almost every single time. Finally, there are some quality of life and UI changes that are being made. Now, there's a number of minor things here, but there's also a major one. And this is changing around the tiering of item mods that are going to be present on items. Presently, in Path of Exile 1, if you have the best tier of fire resistance on an item, then that item will list tier 1 fire resistance. If you have the worst tier, it'll be something like tier 9. Presently in Path of Exile 2, it's inverted. So tier 1 is the worst, tier 9 or whatever is the best. Now, what GGG Games were going for here, and it's one of those things where I think it's a well-intentioned change that just didn't work, they wanted to unify it with the way that map tiers work. So they wanted it to be, you get an item and it's got tier 1 mods on it, you're uninspired, but you get one that's got tier 15 mods on it and you're like, oh, that's cool. You get a map or a waystone in Path of Exile 2, if it's tier 1, you're like, oh yeah, that's mundane and boring. Tier 15, oh, that's cool. That was their goal that they were going for. However, it just confused people because you needed to use external resources like POE 2DB and other websites in order to work out whether you had the best tier of this mod or not. Ultimately, that information is now going to be in-game, and it's going to mean that they will harmonize Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2. Tier 1 mod means the best mod. Tier 2, a step below. Tier 3, another step below. And so on and so forth, going as far as necessary depending on the number of tiers that exist of that particular mod. This, I think, is the best quality of life change that's being made in this patch. Anyways, there's also a number of minor things. You can have a read of those. I'll put a link down in the description below to GGG Games' forum post, which has all of these details in it. I'm going to leave it there, though. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.